took a long time in my life to, but I'm really, we're very pleased with each other.
At 95, Clint Eastwood has lived through decades of fame, success, and countless relationships that came and went like scenes in his movies. Over the years, he met many women, co-stars, companions, and fleeting romances that filled chapters of his remarkable life. Despite all these many affairs, the Hollywood icon admitted there were 6 women he could never get over. Who were these women who stood apart from all the others, who touched his heart in ways that time could never erase? Stay tuned as we uncover the 6 women he could never get over. Number 6. Maggie Johnson. Before Clint Eastwood became the man the world called the cowboy, there was Maggie Johnson. She was quiet, graceful, and loyal, the kind of woman who stood beside him long before the cameras ever turned his way. Maggie met Clint when he was still a young dreamer, a man chasing small roles and waiting tables between auditions. When they married in 1953, Hollywood wasn't looking at Clint yet. But Maggie believed in him more than he believed in himself. She was his balance, calm where he was restless, patient where he was wild. As his career began to rise, Maggie stayed grounded, choosing a life away from bright lights. She rarely appeared in public, never seeking attention. She let him shine, even when that light began to cast long shadows between them. The early years of their marriage were marked by simple dreams, a small house, quiet dinners, and a belief that love could survive anything. But success has a strange way of changing the air around a person. As Clint's name grew, so did the distance between them. Fame brought new faces, new temptations, and a life that pulled him far from home. Maggie endured the whispers, the long absences, and the loneliness that came with loving a man who belonged to the world. She didn't leave. For years, she stood in silence, the steady rhythm beneath his chaos. Her strength wasn't loud. It was the quiet kind. The kind that doesn't make headlines, but leaves an imprint that never fades. People close to Clint would later say that Maggie shaped his idea of loyalty. Even when their marriage finally ended in 1984, she never spoke against him. No interviews, no accusations, just quiet dignity. To Clint, Maggie became more than a memory. She represented a time when love was simple, before fame complicated everything. In his later years, when he spoke of her, it was with a tone that mixed regret and respect. She was the one who saw him before the legend existed, the woman who believed when no one else did. In her eyes, he was just a man, not a movie star or a myth. That honesty stayed with him longer than any role he ever played. Even decades later, when he looked back on his life, Maggie's presence seemed to hover over it all. She was the stillness in the background of every storm. Her influence stretched far beyond their years together, shaping how he treated the women who came after her, often with distance, sometimes with caution, but never without a trace of remembrance. For Clint Eastwood, Maggie Johnson wasn't just the first wife. She was the foundation, the one who built the ground he stood on before the world took notice. Their marriage may have ended, but the lessons remained. That love, once real, doesn't disappear. It only changes shape. She was the first chapter in a story that would grow far more complicated. And though Clint Eastwood's life would lead him down winding roads filled with fame, passion, and secrecy, it all began with her, the one who taught him what love costs and what it's worth. But as Hollywood tightened its grip and success brought shadows, another woman quietly stepped into his world, one who would ignite a secret flame that even Clint couldn't hide forever. Number 5. Roxan Tunis. If Maggie Johnson was the quiet anchor in Clint Eastwood's early life, Roxan Tunis was the spark that set his world alight. She was daring, confident, and full of energy, the kind of woman who didn't wait for permission to live. When their paths crossed in the early 1960s, Clint was standing at the edge of something enormous. His star was beginning to rise, and with it came a life that few could truly understand. But Roxan did. She was an actress and stuntwoman, a rarity in Hollywood's male-dominated circles. She carried herself with a mix of grace and grit, the kind of strength that mirrored Clint's own. To many, she was just another face on a film set, but to him, she became something much deeper. Their connection began quietly, in stolen moments between filming schedules and long drives home. There were no public displays, no declarations of love, but there was understanding. Roxan seemed to recognize the parts of Clint that fame couldn't touch, the restless, searching man behind the composed exterior. Their relationship soon grew into something intense, though it was hidden from the world. Clint was still married to Maggie, and every encounter with Roxan had to exist in the shadows. Yet within those shadows, something real formed, a kind of intimacy that thrived on secrecy. She became the woman he turned to when the weight of success became too heavy, when the image of the perfect actor or family man began to suffocate him. In 1964, Roxan gave birth to their daughter, Kimber. It was a life-changing moment, one that Clint could not fully share with the world. Publicly, he remained married, maintaining the clean Hollywood image that studios demanded. Privately, however, he was a father again, to a child born from a love he could not openly claim. Roxan raised Kimber largely on her own, never speaking against him, never revealing more than she had to. Her silence wasn't weakness, it was grace. She protected what they had, even when the truth could have brought her attention or sympathy. Hollywood whispered about them, insiders knew. But Clint never confirmed anything, and Roxan never demanded acknowledgement. That silence became their shared language, a quiet agreement between two people who cared more about their connection than about the world's judgment. As Clint's career exploded, their lives began to drift apart. Fame consumed him, taking him from one film set to another, while Roxan continued her own work and cared for their daughter. The passion that had once burned so brightly began to cool, but it never completely went out. Even after their romance faded, she remained an important part of his story, not just as the mother of his child, but as someone who saw him without the mask. Years later, when Clint spoke in vague terms about people who stood by me when I didn't deserve it, many believed he was speaking about Roxan. He never gave details. He didn't have to. The tone in his voice carried the truth. She had seen him at his most human and loved him anyway. Roxan Tunis was not the kind of woman who sought fame or revenge. She didn't sell her story or chase headlines. Her strength was quiet, and her loyalty was lasting. To Clint, she represented freedom, the kind that comes from being known, truly known, by someone. She didn't care about his fame or his fortune. She cared about the man who came home tired, unsure, and still trying to figure out what love meant. In his later years, when he reflected on his life, Clint often returned to the people who understood him best. Roxan was one of them. Her name might not appear in his public stories or interviews, but her presence was there, in the quiet moments, in the look that crossed his face when he remembered the past. She represented a chapter that the public never fully saw, but one that shaped who he became. And though time moved forward, and both their lives took separate paths, there was always a part of him, that remained tied to that secret flame. Roxan Tunis had given him something no spotlight could, a love that existed outside of the world's gaze, honest in its imperfections and unforgettable in its depth. But if Roxanne was the secret fire that burned behind closed doors, the next woman would arrive like a storm, unpredictable, young, and full of life. With her, Clint would taste both freedom and recklessness, discovering that passion could be as wild as it was dangerous. Number 4. Sondra Locke. When Sondra Locke walked onto the set of The Outlaw Josie Wales in 1975, the film that Clint directed and starred in, something electric passed between them, not just attraction, but recognition. Sondra, an actress known for her Oscar-nominated performance in The Heart is a Lonely Hunter, had the kind of intensity that could match his. She was clever, fiercely independent, and unwilling to be overshadowed. Clint was drawn to her mind as much as her spirit, and soon their connection moved far beyond the screen. Clint Eastwood was already a man carved from legend. He was tall, silent, and mysterious, the face of American toughness. But behind that calm exterior, Clint carried a restlessness that no fame could quiet. Then came Sondra, sharp, striking, and entirely different from the women he had known. She wasn't dazzled by the myth of Clint Eastwood. She looked straight through it. They began living together in Carmel, California, where Clint had built a quiet retreat away from Hollywood's chaos. For a time, their life seemed like a dream. Two artists creating, clashing, and inspiring each other. Sondra became not only his partner, but also his muse. Together they made 6 films, including The Gauntlet, Every Which Way But Loose, and Sudden Impact. Their on-screen chemistry mirrored the heat of their real lives, volatile, passionate, and impossible to ignore. Sondra's presence challenged Clint in ways that no one else had. She refused to fade into the background. Where others accepted his silence, she demanded conversation. Where others followed, she stood her ground. It was both what drew him to her and what doomed them. He was a man used to control of his sets, his image, his life. But Sondra was uncontainable. She had her own ideas, her own voice, and she wasn't afraid to use it. Still, there were moments of real tenderness. Clint, who had often been distant with others, showed Sondra a rare vulnerability. They shared late nights watching old movies, talking about scripts, and dreaming about future projects. She once said that she saw in him a man more sensitive than anyone would ever believe. For a while, they found balance, a rhythm between love and work. But the cracks were already forming beneath the surface. By the late 1980s, their relationship began to crumble. Clint's focus shifted toward new projects and new people, while Sondra's frustration grew. What had once been mutual admiration turned into mistrust. She wanted equality. He wanted peace. The tension eventually pushed them apart, and in 1989, their relationship ended bitterly. Clint asked her to move out of the home they had shared for over a decade. For Sondra, it wasn't just heartbreak, it was betrayal. Soon after, their private pain became public. Sondra filed a lawsuit against Clint, accusing him of manipulation and career sabotage. She claimed he had quietly blocked her from directing opportunities after their split. For a man who had built his life on privacy, the courtroom battle was devastating. It exposed everything Clint had spent years keeping hidden, the human flaws behind the legend. The case dragged on for years, and though it was eventually settled, the emotional damage was lasting. Sondra wrote about it all in her 1997 memoir, The Good, the Bad, and the Very Ugly. Her words were not cruel, but they were unflinching. She painted Clint as a man of contradictions, gentle but guarded, generous yet controlling, affectionate yet afraid of true intimacy. She admitted she had loved him deeply, even when it hurt. Her book wasn't revenge. It was a final act of truth, a way to reclaim her story after years of living in his shadow. For Clint, Sondra remained a complicated memory. He rarely spoke about her publicly, but those who knew him said her presence lingered long after the anger faded. She had seen the sides of him that few ever reached, the artist, the dreamer, the man beneath the armor. Their love was the kind that changes you, even if it doesn't last. It forced Clint to face the emotional weight of his choices, to understand the cost of power and silence. Sondra Locke passed away in 2018, years after they had gone their separate ways. When the news broke, Clint didn't make a public statement, but those close to him said he was quietly reflective. She had been an important part of his life, both his greatest challenge and his most haunting memory. Their story was not gentle, but it was real. The kind of love that leaves behind both scars and lessons. And when that fire finally dimmed, Clint didn't chase drama again. He turned to peace, to simplicity, and to a woman who would remind him of life's quiet joys. Jacelyn Reeves, the free spirit who brought laughter back into his world. Number 3. Jacelyn Reeves. After the storm of Sondra Locke, Clint Eastwood disappeared for a while, not from the screen, but from the chaos of his own emotions. He was tired of noise, tired of the endless spotlight that had turned his private life into a battlefield. He needed quiet, something real, something that didn't come with scripts or expectations. And that was when Jacelyn Reeves entered his life, a woman far from Hollywood's heavy lights. Jacelyn wasn't an actress or a model. She was a flight attendant from Seattle, grounded, natural, and warm. There was no red carpet introduction, no studio dinner, just a meeting between two people who found comfort in simplicity. For Clint, she was everything that Sondra wasn't. Calm, where Sondra was fierce. Patient, where Sondra was passionate. After years of emotional tension and public scandal, Jacelyn was a gentle reminder that life could still be beautiful without drama. They met sometime in the mid-1980s, during one of Clint's quieter periods between projects. He was already famous worldwide, but with Jacelyn, he didn't have to perform. She didn't see him as the man on the movie poster. She saw him as a human being. She wasn't intimidated by his fame, nor was she chasing it. That quiet confidence drew him in. She was free-spirited, kind, and uninterested in Hollywood's games. Their relationship unfolded in secret, away from the flashing cameras. Clint was still involved with Sondra Locke at the time, which made his relationship with Jacelyn more complicated. Yet, what he felt with her was something deeper, something that didn't rely on the intensity of passion, but rather the peace of companionship. With Jacelyn, he could laugh again. He could talk about simple things, sunsets, small towns, the ocean breeze. He could breathe. Together, they built a hidden life in the shadows of California's coast. While the world speculated about Clint's relationships, he was quietly building a family with Jacelyn. They had 2 children, Scott, born in 1986, and Catherine, born in 1988. Both would grow up to follow their father's footsteps into the world of acting, though neither of them had the traditional Hollywood upbringing. Clint and Jacelyn kept their relationship and their children out of the press, preferring privacy over publicity. Those who knew Clint during those years said Jacelyn brought him balance. She didn't try to control him or compete with him. She simply gave him space to exist as himself. It was a relationship that thrived on understanding rather than grand declarations. For a man who had spent decades in the public eye, that kind of peace was rare. But even peaceful love stories have their endings. Clint's relationship with Jacelyn began to fade as quietly as it started. By the early 1990s, they had drifted apart. There were no headlines, no lawsuits, no bitter interviews, just two people whose paths naturally separated. Clint's life, once again, moved toward new projects and new faces, while Jacelyn chose to stay away from the spotlight. She raised their children quietly, teaching them humility despite their famous father's name. Still, Clint's connection with Jacelyn never completely disappeared. The bond they shared lived on through their children. Scott Eastwood, now an actor in his own right, often speaks about the lessons his father taught him: discipline, hard work, respect for the craft. Those values, though, came not only from Clint, but also from Jacelyn, who ensured her children grew up grounded despite their lineage. Jacelyn Reeves was the kind of woman who never sought recognition, but her presence shaped one of the most private chapters of Clint Eastwood's life. She wasn't part of the Hollywood system. She was the escape from it. For Clint, she was proof that love didn't always need to be dramatic to matter. Sometimes it just needed to be real. And though they eventually went their separate ways, the peace she gave him stayed long after the romance ended. She helped him rediscover laughter, the kind that doesn't come from success or applause, but from shared silence, from the small joys that come when the world stops watching. Their story was not one of fame or tragedy, but of calm, the rare calm a man finds after years of restless wandering. She may not have been the love that defined him, but she was the love that steadied him. In his later reflections, when Clint spoke of the women he could never forget, Jacelyn Reeves was one of the few who left behind no scars, only light. But peace never stays long in the life of a man like Clint Eastwood. Even as he sought calm, another woman appeared, a rising star named Frances Fisher, whose fiery energy would awaken the artist in him once more and remind him that even in his later years, love could still rewrite the story. Number 2. Frances Fisher. When Clint Eastwood met Frances Fisher, he was already a man seasoned by decades of fame, heartbreak, and hard-earned wisdom. It was the late 1980s, and Clint was deep into a period of creative rebirth, moving away from his cowboy roots and into more serious, emotionally layered films. Frances entered his orbit not as a passing fascination, but as an equal. She wasn't a young admirer or an outsider. She was an actress, intelligent and intense, someone who saw beyond the myth of Clint Eastwood to the man who had built it. Their meeting happened on the set of Pink Cadillac in 1988, a film that didn't earn critical acclaim but gave Clint something more meaningful: connection. Frances was confident, articulate, and fiercely independent. She had trained in theater, carried herself with purpose, and didn't flinch at Clint's authority. On set, their chemistry was immediate, not forced by scripts or direction. She challenged him intellectually, spoke her mind, and matched his energy scene for scene. To those who watched them together, it was clear that Clint had found someone who spoke his language, not the one written in scripts or fame, but the quiet, unspoken language of understanding. Frances didn't see him as a movie legend or an untouchable figure. She saw him as an artist, someone still searching, still creating. That simple recognition built a rare intimacy between them. Their relationship deepened away from the cameras. Clint, who had lived so long balancing public life and private secrets, found in Frances a steadying presence. She was passionate but thoughtful, curious but grounded. They spent long stretches of time together between film projects, often escaping to Carmel by the Sea, where Clint's world slowed down to ocean rhythms and quiet walks. Frances, with her bright red hair and expressive eyes, brought warmth and intensity to his otherwise guarded world. They began working together again on Unforgiven in 1992, the film that would later define Clint's career as both an actor and a director. Frances played Strawberry Alice, a strong-willed woman who refuses to be silenced by men. In many ways, her character mirrored her real self, and Clint respected that. On set, their connection only grew stronger. Frances saw the meticulous, perfectionist side of Clint that few people understood. She admired his discipline, his calm authority, and the way he could pull powerful performances from silence rather than speech. Their bond wasn't just professional, it was deeply personal. Frances became pregnant during the production of Unforgiven, and in 1993, they welcomed their daughter, Francesca Eastwood. For a time, their lives seemed peaceful, balanced between family and film. Clint was softer then, a man trying to make up for years of distance and mistakes. Frances brought out a gentler side of him, the side that wanted to be present, that wanted to love without fear of losing himself in the process. They separated quietly around 1995. There was no scandal, no explosive breakup, just a mutual understanding that their paths, once perfectly aligned, were beginning to drift. Frances later described their time together as beautiful but complicated. She admired Clint immensely, not only as a filmmaker, but as a human being trying to balance the impossible demands of fame and family. For her, he would always be someone she respected deeply, even after love evolved into something quieter. Friendship, respect, shared history. For Clint, Frances represented something rare, balance. She was the reminder that love didn't always have to burn. It could also steady. Her presence gave him a sense of emotional clarity that few others had managed to reach. She had given him a daughter who inherited both their strengths, Francesca, who would go on to embrace the same blend of art and independence that had defined both her parents. Even years after their separation, Clint often spoke kindly of Frances. He admired her talent, her discipline, and her refusal to compromise who she was. She wasn't a woman who tried to mold herself into his life. She simply existed in it on her own terms. That quiet defiance, that confidence, left a mark on him. She had been not just a lover, but a collaborator, a mirror, and in many ways, a muse. But even as the years rolled on, one final presence would linger in his heart. Not a lover from his youth, nor a fleeting flame. She was something else entirely. A woman who entered his life in his later years, not with the fire of youth, but with the calm wisdom of experience. A woman who reminded him, once more, what it meant to care beyond fame or time. Dina Ruiz. Number 1. Dina Ruiz. Eastwood's second marriage came in 1996 when he married news anchor Dina Ruiz. The pair met when Dina interviewed him for the Carmel KSBW news station in April 1993. The meeting was professional at first. She was a rising television journalist assigned to interview the famous actor and director who had served as mayor of Carmel by the Sea. But there was an immediate connection that would soon transform from professional courtesy to personal interest. Dina Ruiz was born in 1965, making her 35 years younger than Eastwood. She was a Bay Area news anchor with her own career and aspirations, not simply a starlet seeking fame through association with a Hollywood legend. By the time they met, Eastwood was 63 years old, a Hollywood icon with multiple Academy Awards and a complicated romantic history. Yet something about Dina captured his attention in a way that suggested he was ready for something different, something more stable than the turbulent relationships that had defined much of his past. However, they didn't officially get together until after he broke up with girlfriend Frances Fisher, though Dina and Eastwood were photographed kissing at a golf tournament before he and Fisher officially split. This public kiss, captured by photographers at a golf tournament, effectively ended Eastwood's relationship with Frances Fisher and signaled the beginning of his romance with Dina. After his breakup with Frances, Clint proposed to Dina and the duo got married in 1996. Soon after their wedding, they welcomed their daughter, Morgan Eastwood. Morgan's birth further cemented the family unit. She would be Eastwood's youngest child, born when he was 60 years old. For Dina, who was 31 at the time of Morgan's birth, motherhood and marriage to one of Hollywood's most famous figures transformed her life completely. She had her own career, but increasingly, she became known primarily as Mrs. Eastwood, an identity that came with both privileges and limitations. Their marriage lasted for 18 years, from 1996 to 2014. For nearly 2 decades, they presented the image of a stable Hollywood marriage, a rarity in an industry known for brief unions and dramatic divorces. Dina accompanied Eastwood to film premieres, award shows, and industry events. She supported his work as he continued to direct and occasionally star in films. From the outside, they appeared to be a successful couple who had found lasting happiness. Ruiz made cameos in 2 of Eastwood's films, Blood Work and True Crime, in which Fisher even appeared. These small roles suggested a comfortable integration of their personal and professional lives. The fact that Frances Fisher also appeared in True Crime indicated that, at least professionally, Eastwood maintained relationships with former partners, a testament either to his ability to compartmentalize or to the professionalism of the women in his life. By 2013, problems started cropping up in Dina and Clint's marriage, and she filed for a divorce from him and sought joint custody of their daughter. The specifics of what went wrong remained largely private, as both Eastwood and Dina maintained discretion about the details of their separation. What is known is that Dina filed for legal separation in October 2013, when Eastwood was 83 years old. 2 months after she sent in the paperwork, the reporter spoke on Bethany Frankel's former eponymous TV show about her separation. "I don't think we will be getting back together," Dina said at the time. Remarkably, despite the end of their marriage, Dina spoke positively about Eastwood even after filing for divorce. Dina said post-split, "He's probably the sweetest guy I've ever met. He is the sweetest. He is a loving, kind, low-key person, so my intuition was still great on marrying a good person." After they got divorced, Dina went on to marry former basketball player Scott Fisher in 2016. For Eastwood, the relationship with Dina was significant, not just for its duration, but for what it represented. An attempt late in life to create the kind of stable family life that had always eluded him. That it ultimately failed doesn't diminish the effort or the years they shared. In his own authorized biography, Eastwood had described his past affairs as addictive, comparing them to needing another cigarette. With Dina, he seemed to be trying to break that pattern, to choose commitment over compulsion. Those who knew him during his marriage to Dina speak of it as a period when he genuinely tried to be the husband and father he perhaps wished he had always been. Whether that's true, or simply another story told about a man whose real inner life remains largely unknown, is something only Eastwood himself could say, and he has always preferred to keep such reflections private. If you enjoyed this video, like and subscribe, and also click the next video shown on your screen.